Whenever we enter the self-help section of social media or our local library, it just seems like a never-ending cycle of hacks that promise to change our lives that just only kind of works for us for a short time, and then we're back to the drawing board. Are we just not capable? We'll often ask ourselves. You're not alone. This happens because personal growth resources lack personalization, and we also lack a very structured way to understand where we are at in life and what we need to level up to our next stage. It's from understanding yourself that you can properly take action on the challenges that you have in your life. So I created the Better Life Framework to help you understand yourself better and figure out where to look in order to unlock your potential. It's time to level up. My name is Conrad, and I've been building and sharing programs to help people live better lives for many years now, and we've helped hundreds of thousands of people make work fun, be intentional, and take back life control. In this journey, I was always really curious about why do some solutions speak so strongly to us in the moment? We've all had that experience where we were really into that daily journal or really into gamification, but then we end up fading in and out of solutions that used to work, right? We don't always do meditation anymore. We don't always do the things that we know has worked for us in the past. So personal development and the process of going through all these different resources really sometimes feels like a waste of time. We dig through so many different solutions and so very few actually make sense to us in the moment, let alone lasting for our duration of our lives. So today we're going to demystify all of that and explain everything in a very understandable way with the Better Life Framework. So this is the Better Life Framework, and it describes 9 unique perspectives that we all go through in our lives, and it's based on foundational theories in psychology and human development like spiral dynamics, developmental levels, hierarchy of needs, and cognitive development theory. It's useful for personal and professional development because it's going to provide you a framework to understand yourself and others in a way that you never thought possible and develop true empathy. And at the end of the day, what I hope is that learning this helps you feel less helpless about any situation you encounter in your life because now you can understand it. So before we dive in, here's what you need to know about perspectives. You can consider each perspective as the way that you interpret the world at that moment. A higher perspective doesn't mean better person. It's just the stages of development that we go through, and typically you will unlock each perspective one by one. Once you unlock a perspective, it doesn't mean that you'll always be thinking at that level. It depends on the context and situation and also how emotional you might be at the moment. The goal is to understand the perspectives that you and others may be thinking in so that you can understand how to react in the situation to get the outcomes that you want. So let's first start by asking the question, what does happiness mean to you? Well, if happiness is getting what I need, then it means that your perspective is currently in either the survival perspective or the dependency perspective. And let's describe each one. So when you're in the survival perspective, life is all about dealing with my needs and feeling good by getting what I need. Essentially from birth, our primary focus is to fulfill basic needs like eating, sleeping, and attending to our bodily functions. And every time we need to handle our bodily functions, we're actually tapping into survival. Imagine the last time you were feeling very hungry, right? You're just very reflexive and your actions are driven by your immediate physical sensations and needs. This is where a lot of hangriness comes from, right? And essentially the analogy that you can use to think about it is, like hunger driving us to eat, our basic needs dictate our actions. We are simply driven by our needs to survive. And essentially, if you're in this perspective, what it feels like to you is that, well, I'm desperately trying to do what I need to survive in this world. If my body needs it, I'll take it and I'll do it, right? And of course, we can also take a look at if it was the social structure, right? So at what time was the majority of the population thinking in this perspective? And it was when we were cavemen, right? Around 100,000 years ago, we were focused solely on survival and immediate needs. The next perspective inside this group is dependency. In this perspective, life is all about pleasing others or the gods so that they can give us what we need. And our motivations at this time are impulsive. We notice that others have senses, desires, and feelings, and simply respond to what we see in others to get what we need. We recognize that there's certain things that we can do to make our parents do something for us that will help us survive. And a lot of it is reciprocity based. We understand reciprocal relationships, helping others to ensure our own needs are met. But the funny thing here is that we cannot tell the difference between people and things. And there's a really interesting example in history about this. So actually, if you go to social structure, you can see that this is or about tribal times where we have social bonds and community needs come to the forefront. And essentially, everyone's banding together to make sure that everyone can survive, right? People are taking turns being on night watch because simply they know that, hey, as long as we're together, we can actually have an opportunity to survive longer. But here's where you also start getting like a lot of like pagan gods. And essentially what you do there is you say, hey, I want this certain thing to happen in nature, right? Whether I want it to rain because of my crops or whatever it might be. And then you start thinking about it. Well, it's like, hey, if the rain is not coming for me, right? Maybe it's angry at me because I understand anger, right? I can feel anger. And if I'm angry, I don't do things for other people, right? So maybe they're angry. So I need to throw my valuables into a volcano, right? So that hopefully gods aren't so angry at me. But essentially at this stage, we can't tell the difference between people and things. We think the inanimate objects are needed to be pleased just like how we would please another individual to get what we need from them. And so what it feels like when we're in this perspective is I can't take care of myself, so I need to please others so they give me what I need to survive. It's a very, very visceral feeling. So these are the two perspectives that you'll most likely be in if you are struggling to get your basic needs. But once you get your basic needs, then what? Well, as we all know, we start then craving what we want. And we believe that the more we get what we want, the happier we will become. So let's take a look at all the different perspectives under this section. So the first one is all about winning. And in this perspective, life is about getting what I want by taking or creating advantages for myself. And at this stage, you understand that you have wants. And you realize that while others may help you take care of your basic needs, everyone is really looking out for their own wants. And if we want to get what we want, we need to go get it ourselves. For example, your parents might take care of you, but they want to mold you in their image, for example. They want to go to a certain school. They want you to do certain things. So you're recognizing that your wants don't align with theirs, even though they will help you survive. And at this stage, we start to learn to delay gratification when we think a bit about long-term implications rather than our immediate desires. And the way that we kind of deal with the world is very transactional. We always engage in exchanges, always expecting something in return for our efforts. And I don't want to say this in a bad way. It's not bad to be transactional per se, but it's just because we're first just trying to figure out how to interact and operate in the world that we kind of force ourselves to be transactional, right? We want certain things and we want to make sure we get them. So the social structure of when most people lived in this perspective is feudal empires, right? You can think of them as like hierarchical structures dominating the era with power concentrated in the hands of few because everyone's trying to be the hero. Everyone's trying to be the main character. So what does it feel like to be in the perspective of winning? Well, you feel like I'm the main character, right? No one else is going to take care of me better than me, so I need to make sure to get what I want out of the situation. And actually, many of us can relate to being in this stage, right? We all know how it feels like to want to get the things that we want. So I really recommend if you want to learn more about how you can maximize yourself in the winning perspective, definitely check out these programs because essentially what we've done was we worked with our co-creators here at the Coast Street Family Foundation to develop programs for every single one of these perspectives. So no matter what perspective that you're in, we are always going to be sure you have something here that we have found that will work for you, that will actually fit your needs in that moment. So at some point, you realize that life isn't all about winning, right? Maybe it's about winning together. And you either get to this phase because you found a group that helps you win by being part of their tribe, or you have actually gotten everything you wanted in a winning perspective. So for example, you go and get that car that you want, you go and get that life that you want, right? Those material goods, but then you start realizing that you desire meaning. So at this perspective, life is about knowing what's right and what's wrong, and actually making sure other people do the right thing too, because we are now aligning ourselves to a deeper meaning, a deeper purpose. And typically that comes either in forms of some kind of social connection, right? Or some kind of religious connection. So our motivations here are very much about social conformity. We seek belonging and acceptance and often conform to social norms or influence others to align with our beliefs because we start thinking that we know what's right. We know the right way to live in the world and we want to make sure everybody follows this. And typically, we understand that other people may think differently than us, but we're sure that what we want and believe is the right thing. And if you take a look at the social structure that dominated when we had this mindset, it was very much nation states. So structured governance, when they emerged with collective identity and societal norms, It's around 5,000 years old. And what does it feel like when you're in this perspective? Well, I found what works for me and my tribe, and everyone should do it too. Why can't they understand that what I'm doing is good for them? And I'm sure we all have examples of this where we recognize that there are people out there that really, really, really believe in what they have found to be the truth, right? But for some reason, for them to believe that truth, you need to also be forced to believe that too. Otherwise, their truth is damaged. So in this case, you see a lot of different kind of social groups kind of warring together, right? Because they all need, and it's a desperate need for them to be right, because they have just moved beyond the winning stage. They have just moved beyond being transactional. They've just found this new purpose in their life, and they really want to make sure that it's sound, it's solid, and the only way to do that is to make sure everyone believes in it as well. At some point, we start taking a look at systems. And when we're in this perspective, we realize that life is actually about knowing how to make good things happen, keeping the benefits, and always improving. And this came about because we started losing faith. We started questioning our societal norms and started exploring our own paths to success and gaining confidence in our own ability to shape our lives. We start being motivated by functional reasoning, where we adopt logical thinking and objective observation, relying on empirical evidence and rational thought. And the whole idea here is that we're trying to create systems to optimize our lives and help different people work together. We've seen what goes wrong in the belonging perspective because we can't live life just always warring, right? Arguing about who's right, who's wrong. So what's more important is figuring out what is the truth, right? So then we can all work together. And this is really where you started seeing a lot of different money started coming into the picture here, right? Where capitalism, like market forces, were driving societal changes. And really we started emphasizing individual success and merit, right? And it just began in like the 1600s. And what it feels like to be in this perspective is I'm aware that people have different wants. So an analogy now that I can use across different perspectives is if you had two people in the perspective of winning, then let's say that they wanted to trade something. Let's say one person was farming, barley crops, and the other person was farming peas, and they wanted to exchange. Well, that exchange would only really happen, right, if they both wanted the same thing from each other, right? Or they found a third person to trade with them to have a three-way trade. But when you start dealing with systems, it's when you start realizing that, hey, yes, maybe you don't want the thing that I want to give, and maybe I don't want the thing you want to give, but I want to figure out what is this common denominator that we can use to figure everything else out together so that we can create a system where we can work together even if we have differences, right? Even if we are across different party lines, right? Or having different religions, we can still go to work and work together side by side. And that's what capitalism has brought to the table here. So I also want to mention that getting into systems is actually a very interesting perspective because you can go about it from two ways as well. Either one is that, hey, you have gotten what you wanted, right? So therefore, you're able to go ahead and find systems for yourself because you're just like, hey, I take, what worked in this social group and I work in that social group and I'm going to make my own worldview and life is more successful for me because of that. Or you can actually be going into that perspective simply because you realize that you don't actually get what you want. You haven't found that tribe that really fits you. You haven't really found the group of people that will protect you, right? And so therefore you instead go towards idea that, hey, I'm going to build my own tribe. I want to build my own thing because I want to make sure good things happen. I want to keep the benefits and I always want to improve. So you notice that both 5 and 6, systems and letting go, exist in both of these sections because you can either go there because things have been going well for you, or you can go there because things actually haven't gone so well, but you decide to change your frame of reference from, hey, I'm only happy if I get what I want, to I'm not really getting what I want in life, but I'm still going to choose to be happy because I'm learning from my experiences, and therefore my experience can then shape my worldview of how I want to build my life moving forward. Systems is all about building your own life and building the life that you love. So then let's talk about letting go. This perspective is very, very interesting because at this perspective, you start thinking about life as being free to be whoever we are. And if we stop telling others what to do, we would have peace. And essentially, what experience drives us to think this way is that we realize the limitations of rigid systems and recognize the need for adaptability and personal judgment. This is when we've kind of been in the workforce for quite a bit already, or just really see like some injustice of the system. And we realize that, hey, we need to be radical realists, right? There are multiple valid perspectives, and we have to understand that reality is so complex and multifaceted. And we have to strive to make sure everyone's accommodated through rejection of structure. Structure doesn't help everyone. So how do we make sure that we can really, enable everyone to feel accommodated? And the analogy here, we call them hippies, right? But it's not really a terrible term. I just want to use this as like the way to understand. It's like, hey, at this phase, right, at this perspective, we embrace freedom and individual expression, and we often reject conventional structures. And here, you can take a look at the social structure. And typically at this social structure, it's all about socialism, where our focus shifts to equitable distribution and communal welfare, which began in the 1800s-ish. And so what it feels like to be in this perspective is, well, I'm aware that systems don't work on everyone. It might be better if there was no structure. And I actually call this perspective I would call it a very precarious stage to be in, because of course, in the world that we live in, we can't just let go forever, right? And I guess you could try, right? If you have enough salary and you go and you save up enough money and you go to like a very cheap country like Thailand or, Philippines or Bali, or Indonesia or, those kind of places. And yes, you could live for a very long time just letting go. But basically, in this stage, you have two choices, right? Either one, you go ahead and you spend all that money and you relax and you live off, society for a little bit, but eventually you'll have to go back to systems, right? Because you have to go and work and make some money to sustain your lifestyle. Or the other way is that you are able to then move towards the next perspective, which what we call is setting boundaries, right? And at this stage, you still very much care about expressing your individuality, right? Of course, that's super important to you. And that's one of the core happinesses that we all share, right? Is that we can express our uniqueness. But at this perspective, what we realize is that, yes, it would be nice if everyone does their own thing, but actually life is probably about drawing boundaries and saying no is for the best, because I need to protect myself from having my boundaries crossed, right? If everyone's doing their own thing and everyone's committing, their own value of what morality is in the world, well, the world will fall into chaos, right? And the best way to actually be able to enter the setting boundary stage is to obtain power. And at this perspective, we understand that having power, whether it be influence, wealth, etc., enables us to actually set boundaries without constraints and prioritize personal well-being. And it's not easy. I want to be very, very clear. It's totally not easy, right, to set boundaries, because I think a lot of us try our best, but we're in positions where we get a paycheck, right, from someone, or we rely on someone else to do something that we need. And therefore, we can't set all the boundaries that we want to, even though we know it'd be good for us, right? So what I say here is that, I say this with the greatest amount of empathy, is that, hey, we all need to strive to set boundaries, but we might not always be able to. And our motivations at this perspective is all about universal principles. So we start seeing how systems are related, interdependent, and synergistic or clashing. We just want harmony and balance, right? And the analogy here is that, hey, we need to enforce boundaries so that we set limits to maintain order and protect personal and collective well-being. So yes, everyone should be free to do what they want, but if you're going to cross a boundary that's going to harm me, right? So let's say, hey, I'm going to set a law that says you cannot kill people and you still choose to kill people. Well, I'm going to need to put you in jail. That's a real consequence that we'll have to enforce upon you. And so if we take a look at the social structure here, you can see that it's very world-centered. We care about global awareness and collective responsibility, and that's taking precedence. And it's beginning in the mid-1900s, where our society is moving that way. And what summarizes, I think, this whole group of perspectives is happiness is about expressing my individuality, but the more we are free to do what we want without hurting others, the happier we will be. And this really started coming out because we started realizing that there's a lot of different people in the world. A lot of people think in many, many different ways, but we actually need to survive with them. We actually need to coexist with them. So how can we do that, right? And the best way to do is to set boundaries. But it's not easy. We start noticing that when people first start setting boundaries, we start worrying. It's like, hey, will I offend someone if I say no to them, right? And we all are people pleasers at some part of us, and we all feel like we want to say yes to things and we want to help people. So saying no is actually very, very hard. So when that happens, we actually need to really train ourselves to set boundaries. And at the beginning, we're gonna set boundaries in all sorts of ways. We're gonna set boundaries, we're gonna say no to so many things because we're just trying to learn how to say no. But as we keep improving on that process, as people keep acknowledging our no's and just accept them without challenging them, we start feeling more empowered to really protect ourselves and move on to the next perspectives. So next, we start wondering what's beyond our individuality. and we start thinking about, well, what if happiness is all about fulfillment? It's not about me, it's about we. And fulfillment comes when I'm at my best self and contributing to others. Let's talk about the curiosity perspective. And curiosity perspective is all about, well, life is just an experiment. All we can do is the best we know. We all should know more. So how we unlock this perspective is if we have ample time. With abundant time, we can be intellectually curious about those others who will actually still intrude on our boundaries even after we set them, right? So yeah, we will set rules that say, hey, don't kill people, right? But there are still murders out there, right? Just setting the rule doesn't change anything. So how come, right? So the idea here is that we can either choose to be frustrated, right? Because we don't have time to deal with all these people. Or if we have enough time, we can actually go and say, hey, how come you think this way, right? What is about you? How are you wired this way that makes you do these things? And your motivations are really all about the psychological process. We introspect and question everything, understanding ourselves as narratives shaped by our experiences. And the analogy for this is really about intellectual curiosity. We realize that people will push your limits even if they are consequences. So let's just be curious, right? Why be so frustrated? And the social structure for this is collective individualism, where individuals fully acknowledge and embrace their interconnectedness with society while maintaining their personal identity and autonomy. And it began in the late 1900s. And what it feels like to be in this perspective is I accept that people will cross my boundaries, so I should do my best to be curious and spend time to understand why. And this is, again, not a very easy feat, right? If someone's doing something that potentially can harm you and you don't want to accept them in the beginning, you don't want to, ask them questions, you just want to reject, right? Because you want to protect yourself. And so it takes a lot of work, inner work, to really go the extra mile and say, hey, you are doing something terrible to me, right? Or you want to do something terrible to me, but I'm still going to be here and sit down and ask why. And the most interesting thing is that through this process, you might realize that the terrible things that they are doing to them probably has a rhyme and reason, right? And you can probably try to understand that. But through that understanding of them, right, you actually end up feeling a lot of peace. And we can talk more about that another time. So the last perspective here is called empathy. And in the empathy perspective, life is about learning where and how to shine the light. I am not the main character. I am just the spotlight, and what is revealed is what I illuminate. So this is pretty tricky for me to explain, and I'll try my best to, but typically there are very, very few people that are actively tapping into this level of consciousness on a day-to-day basis because it's just very difficult, right? And the experience that we have to get to is we need to reach a stage where we can love and accept others unconditionally, regardless of their circumstances. It's unconditional love, right? And the idea here is that we are very aware of intersystemic evolution. We observe, understand, protect, honor, and allow all forms of life and phenomena. So because we understand all these different things, we are able to have these unconditional love for these people who are, behaving in a way that, we can just really understand because we've been there, right? We've been through all the perspectives. We know that's how someone is thinking, right? So we have really high self-awareness of what perspective even we are thinking at all times, and just recognize our power to choose our focus, right? We can choose our focus to be, instead of seeing them as, me versus them and like an enemy and, gotta protect myself, right? And so instead of us jumping to our own conclusions about things, right, we can easily then just choose to accept them where they're at, right, with unconditional love, right? And the idea here is that the social structure doesn't really exist yet. Hopefully there's a future society, but it's a visionary society, and potentially it'll be shaped by our foundation, which emphasizes holistic well-being and interconnectedness. And what it feels like to be in this perspective is, well, I understand that everyone's on their own journey, and all we can do is love them where they're at. That's all we can do. So I urge you to check out this table for yourself, right? And explore through all the different buttons and press everything. And you can also even see like this filter here where it's like, hey, I'm dealing with someone that's kind of feeling very transactional right now, and I care about optimizing. So, and maybe we have a third person that cares about, enforcing boundaries. So what's going on with us? What is the situation that I find myself in, right? So you can even use this table in this way to really understand and analyze the different situations that you might find yourself in, right? And you can read more about each perspective as you click on these buttons inside each page. So you can really get a full understanding of each one. But what I hope to distill with you is a starting point, right? For you to start going into this journey of thinking about thinking, right? Of going into your consciousness and really evaluating and understanding where you're thinking about your life? How do you think about the world? And your perception is your reality. So the ways that we see the world will fundamentally change the way that we, interpret how the world is treating us, right? So for example, if we go ahead and see everything as a transaction, then everything will look like a transaction to us and we won't find the belonging that we want, right? If we see everything as belonging, if we see everyone as like, hey, it's either me versus them, well, we're not going to have the chance to actually go out and create something together and build something beautiful across different cultures, across different religions, across different societal structures, right? So the beauty of this framework, this Better Life framework, is that we're essentially giving you a tool to understand yourself wherever you're at and really dig deep into what motivates you in that time and then find the right programs to support you. So if you're in the winning perspective, it's perfectly fine, by the way, right? I tap into it from time to time as well. But in that moment, gamification is going to be awesome for you, right? You're going to actually really, really enjoy turning life into a game, right? Because everything's a transaction. Why not make the rewards super clear? That will also make your life super easy. And when you're in the belonging perspective, well, it's going to be really important for you to find your why, right? Be intentional, seek your purpose, right? And then if you are, in the letting go phase, well, it's really important for you to really learn how to meditate. Try to figure out how to meditate in these perspectives. Well, it's not that you can't do it. Obviously, if you practice something, you'll still get the benefits of it, but you're not going to stick with it. It's not going to be easy or intuitive for you to always pursue that because at that moment, your motivations just aren't it. Your motivations are not aligned with the solution you're trying to implement in your life. And that's what we're trying to do and communicate here with the Better Life Framework is that everybody needs something different at that time. And we need a very empathetic way of approaching that. It doesn't make sense that, when we go and say, hey, I want to improve myself in productivity, in, discipline and self-development, whatever it might be, and we go on YouTube and social media and read the books and they're all just shout out their brand of how they got to where they got to, how they developed discipline, how they became the most productive person ever, how they became successful in XYZ way. Well, the issue is that they don't communicate it in a way that makes sense to you, right? If you're not even thinking at the same perspective as they were thinking at that time, their solution is not going to work for you, right? And it's painful, by the way, to, switch between perspectives. I'm not going to say it's easy, by the way. Each perspective is really clearly indicated by a very dramatic change in your life that has caused you to think drastically different, right? Hey, realizing that your group isn't really there for you, right? And maybe doesn't conform to 100% of what you believe in, and you lose faith, that's painful. That's super painful. I'm not saying that's an easy path, but that's a path that you might want to take. And I think what a lot of people aren't communicating well enough when they communicate their own life story of how they were successful, how they accomplished certain things, is that they actually didn't communicate what exact perspective were they in before, what they had to do to overcome that. And probably it wasn't a very clear and straightforward process for them either. That's why they can't communicate it. And then what perspective do they think in now? Because I think it's very jarring for anybody who's trying to follow in the shoes of someone else to just be told, just do it, right? And just figure it out. And people say that, but how do I just do it, right? What is that step? And even if they do tell you a step, why doesn't that step resonate with us? So I think that's something really, really important to think about. And another thing to talk about here is that question that a lot of people ask me in the community is, well, can you skip a step? They think that they skipped from, let's say belonging to letting go. And I can tell you that yes, you can feel like you skipped the step, right? You can definitely feel like you want to let go. But what I'm going to tell you is that it's not a very stable form of keeping that perspective. Because you haven't fully explored that perspective, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to maintain this perspective because you're like always, well, what if I actually follow the system all the way? Would life have been better for me? And because you've never actually fully went down that rabbit hole, you will always wonder, and until you actually get the experience for yourself where you go and, hey, I've tried every single system out there. I've tried every productivity tool out there. I've read every book. I've done every single thing, right? And I've tried all the systems and it still doesn't work for me. That's when you realize that you can actually move towards the next perspective in life. And if you don't do that, it will be almost improbable for you to actually move on in a stable manner. So anyways, I recommend you check out the framework for yourself, right? And take the quiz. We have a quiz up here. You can just click on it. It connects to our AI assistant. And essentially, you can ask any questions that you want that relates to any situation that you're going through, right? And it can help you evaluate what perspective that you and the other people around you are thinking at, so you can learn how to react in those situations and get the outcomes that you want. If you have any questions, please let us know in the comments. We'll be posting regularly about the framework and how to use it in everyday situations to help you understand yourself better and maximize your happiness based on your needs and motivations, and level up whenever you're ready. It's time to level up.